Welcome to the Expert Series, where we explore the issues shaping Canadian national security and defense. I'm Gabriella Picton, Research Assistant at the CDA Institute. Today, we are joined by Egidijus Meilunas, Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania to Canada. Through conversation on Lithuania's current defense buildup in light of growing threats posed by Russia, we explore potential opportunities for further deepening of collaboration with Canada in this regard. We're looking forward to getting started and having an excellent conversation today. This is the Expert Series. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Expert Series. We are truly grateful and honored to be able to host you today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this interview. It's for me, it's a really great opportunity to present our views on security and defense and cooperation with our two countries in this area. And we value Canada as a very important partner, like-minded country, an ally and friend. And Canada makes a very significant contribution to the security of our region through Operation Reassurance and the deployment of the Canadian Brigade to Latvia. So that is, I believe, really great example of how to effectively we can respond to the security threats posed by authoritarian regimes. I truly believe that our enhanced cooperation and solidarity are the best answers to these threats. So today I am really more than happy and honored having this possibility to discuss with you.
We have a great discussion ahead of us today on Lithuanian and Canadian security and how enhanced cooperation between the two and the larger whole of the EU will change in evolving world events at the current moment in time. So, if it's all right, I'd love to get started.
Yeah,
Perfect.
great.
In late February 2025, Canadian and European leaders met to discuss how to best support Ukraine if the United States continued to pull back from their role in ensuring transatlantic security. Following their meeting, Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda announced a six-part plan, of which the need for investment into both Ukrainian and pan-European defense industries was highlighted. Could you elaborate on what other steps Lithuania is taking now to develop its military and defense capacities at the national level and aid in the development of the continent's strategic autonomy?
Thank you very much. Very good question for the beginning. And as in the beginning, as you mentioned, the 6-point plan presented by our president, Mr. Gitanas Nausėda, let me briefly outline its key points. So these are 6.6 elements. First, security guarantees for Ukraine, including a clear path to NATO membership. Also, continued robust funding for military support to Ukraine. Also, accelerated accession of Ukraine to the European Union. And then accountability for Russia's war crimes and maintaining and strengthening sanctions of Russia. And last but not least, easing frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's benefit. And I truly believe that our president presented a very clear and concise plan detailing how to ensure long-term security for the transatlantic community. And the core principle is that only Russia's defeat in Ukraine, its accountability for aggression, and what is very important, Ukraine's full integration into NATO and the EU can provide such guarantees for us, for Western countries, for transatlantic community. Lithuania, like Canada, is and will remain a steadfast ally of Ukraine, providing support across military, financial, humanitarian, and political domains. Just for your information, our total support to Ukraine already equals approximately to 1.5% of our GDP, with about half of that support being military support. And our long-lasting commitment for the future is to allocate at least 0.25% of our national GDP annually, specifically to support Ukraine's defense and security sectors. Now, answering to your question regarding Lithuanian, the steps Lithuania is taking at the national level to strengthen our own defense capabilities, I would like to mention at least 6 of them. So first is we are significantly increasing defense spending. Just before Russia's full-scale aggression in 2022, our defense budget stood at 2% of our GDP. After the invasion, we immediately raised it to 2.5%. Last year, we reached over 3%, and this year we are approaching to 4, almost 4. Our long-term commitment is even more ambitious, to reach between 5 to 6% of GDP in 2030. Second step is pursuing rapid military modernization and acquisition. Lithuania is actively procuring advanced military hardware, including artillery, tanks, air defense systems, as well as developing drone and counter-drone systems. Third step is building up our national defense industry, and in this regard, we are emphasizing innovation and cooperation with international partners. One of examples is our collaboration with Germany's Rheinmetall. We are going to establish artillery shell production in Lithuania. Fourth step is expanding our armed forces personnel. We are undertaking a significant expansion, and we have planned to establish a national military division by 2030. The fifth step is enhancing infrastructure. We are expanding and modernizing our major training areas and military bases. The sixth step is investing heavily in cybersecurity, and I am proud to say that our capabilities in this domain are now probably among the strongest in Europe. And maybe one more thing I have to mention, which is crucial, is deepening cooperation with allies. And again, one great example, the upcoming permanent stationing of a German brigade in Lithuania is probably one of the most significant developments demonstrating enhanced collective defense posture. Now, answering to your question on Europe's strategic autonomy. So there is no doubt that Europe must substantially and rapidly strengthen its defense capabilities. If you examine defense spending trends after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's very clear that most European NATO allies significantly reduced military expenditures. Just I would like to give you a few examples. Before 1992, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, many spent well over 2% of GDP on defense. By 2014, when Russia first time attacked Ukraine, most Western allies were spending just slightly above 1% or even less. And despite the commitment outlined in the same year of 2014 at NATO Wales Summit, guidelines to reach 2% of GDP, progress remained very slow for years. So, meanwhile, Russia has consistently invested in its military development since 1992, typically spending 3, even 4% of its GDP annually, and reaching 4.53% in 2016, and much higher now. For 3 decades, so summarizing, for 3 decades, Russia has been building up its military strength, while Europe, relatively speaking, was disarming. So, as our President Nausėda said, presenting this 6-point plan, I quote, "The time for talk is over. It's time for decisive and rapid action." The EU has recently taken key, I would even say, historic decisions to rearm and bolster its defense capabilities, and I am confident that we will see real progress. So Lithuania's commitment to Europe's security is very clear. Our national decisions, I have already mentioned, will contribute, I believe, significantly for that. So, however, we must also recognize that even with a stronger Europe, we cannot face all security threats alone, especially in the short or even medium term. So, that's why preserving and strengthening NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the most effective collective defense alliance in history, remains paramount.
Keeping Lithuania's support for Ukrainian defense in mind, I'm hoping we can shift to look further at the development of Lithuania's own defense buildup. Is the Russo-Ukrainian War the main driver of Lithuania's defense buildup? Does the threat posed by Russia extend beyond the immediate conflict in Ukraine? And if so, how might it pose a threat to the larger transatlantic community in the years to come?
First, I would like to comment on terminology. Descriptions like war in Ukraine, conflict in Ukraine, Ukraine conflict, Ukraine crisis, or even Russia-Ukrainian war are not correct, I believe, as they fail obscure the identity of the aggressor. We must call things by their true name. In fact, it is a genocidal Russian war against Ukraine, Russia's brutal and provoked aggression against a neighboring sovereign country. So, speaking about Lithuania, the main driver of our defense build-up is not solely the current phase of aggression since 2022, but I would say rather a realistic understanding of the enduring imperialistic nature of Russia. This understanding is deeply rooted in our history and very dramatic and even tragic experience with Russia. Just to give you an example from 20th century when we were occupied almost for 50 years by Russians. So we lost to this occupation nearly 25% of our population. Tens of thousands were brutally killed by Russians. Hundreds of thousands were deported to Siberia, and hundreds of thousands more fled Russian terror to free democratic countries like Canada, and many of them never had a chance to return home. Russia's hasn't fundamentally changed over the centuries, and its attacks on neighbors in 21st century, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, and again the full-scale invasion in 2022, I believe 100% proof of this. To better understand this, as I mentioned, imperialistic or even fascist nature of today's Russia, you should read a textbook written by Alexander Dugin. This textbook in 1997 was approved by Russia's Ministry of Education as a textbook for Russian higher military schools. Title of this book is Foundations of Geopolitics in English. Published nearly 30 years ago by this, as I mentioned, Alexander Dugin, who is key creator of the ideology of Russian expansionism. It contains really shocking statements asserting that Ukraine and many other sovereign European countries have now no right to exist. You know why? Because I quote, they have no geopolitical meaning. In fact, this means that Russia sees the very existence of those countries, Ukraine and others, as a threat to its imperialistic ambitions. So in 1997, these statements probably might have sounded like insane delusions, but they were not. Now they read like an evil plan in active implementation. And if you wish to know what Russia's long-term goals are, you should know that Russian military elite has been taught for decades from this textbook by Dugin, which states, again I quote, the new Russian empire should be Eurasian, highly continental, and in the future worldwide. Worldwide. The battle for Russian domination is not over. End of quotation. So I believe this quotation perfectly reveals Russia's true intentions to dominate globally. And today we see the aggressive behavior manifesting not only in Europe, but also in other continents and regions, Africa and the Arctic as well, and as in attempts to increase influence in Asia and Latin America. And we see that despite huge losses in Ukraine and quite complicated, difficult economic situation, Russia continues to invest heavily in its war machine and demonstrates preparedness for a long confrontation with the West. It's also crucial not to forget that Russia is attacking us, the transatlantic community, Western mm, countries right now on a daily basis. Russia's hybrid warfare, which includes massive cyber attacks, disinformation and misinformation campaigns, propaganda, direct interference and manipulation of political processes, acts of sabotage and attacks against critical infrastructure, aims to undermine the security, stability, and cohesion of the transatlantic community. As it was stated in three last NATO summits in Madrid, Vilnius, and Washington, Russia, again I quote, is the most significant and direct threat to allies' security. And this threat now is reinforced by Russia's cooperation with China and other accomplices like North Korea, Belarus, and Iran, who share the same goal with Russia of destroying Western values, the rules-based international order, and the Western way of life. So, summarizing, it's critically important to adequately understand the threats to our security, to invest sufficiently in deterrence and defense, and to remain united.
If Russian aggression towards Europe remains unstopped, does Lithuania expect the Baltics to be targeted next?
Yes, countries on NATO's eastern flank are often considered potential targets due to their geographic proximity. But if Russia is not decisively stopped in Ukraine, I truly believe that any other members of the transatlantic community could become targets. Let's take Arctic as an example. Russia has shown its clear intention to dominate the region and has significantly expanded its military presence, military infrastructure, enhanced its capability there in recent years. This is compounded by Russia's increasingly close cooperation with China, an autocratic country that also has growing strategic interests in the Arctic. In Russian strategic thinking, the Arctic is not merely a resource-rich zone. It is viewed as a critical region for achieving global influence and challenging Western interests. Control over the Arctic is seen as essential to securing Russia's geopolitical ambitions. And again, referring to the textbook Foundations of Geopolitics, published in 1997, almost 30 years ago, Russian future officers have been taught that the United States is the main enemy of Russia. And this perspective holds that Russia's main long-term strategic target remained the United States, as it was during the Cold War, with nothing fundamental having changed in the 21st century. Again, I quote Dugin's textbook. The American empire should be destroyed, and at one point it will be. So again, summarizing, given these developments, I believe that we do not have to speculate which country or region might be the next target of Russia's aggression. Instead, we must act decisively now to ensure Russia is stopped in Ukraine. And simultaneously, we have to enhance our joint efforts to deter Russia from implementing its expansionist goals anywhere else in the future, be it on the eastern flank, in the Arctic, or through hybrid means across the entire transatlantic space.
As you said, if Russia is not decisively stopped in Ukraine, any area of the transatlantic alliance could be next to face such a threat. Countries, such as Lithuania, who have the foresight to acknowledge this, to ramp up aid and assistance to Ukraine, and to prepare to deter Russia in their own countries, will consequently be better prepared to combat potential further Russian attacks. As such, the Baltic states generally are increasingly drawing attention for their dedication to what is referred to as comprehensive or total societal defense. Does this model stem from the legacy of the Soviet occupation? And can you elaborate a bit further on how it is shaping Lithuanian defense strategy in the present day?
Very important question. Lithuania's commitment to total defense is not just a strategic concept, it's deeply personal and ingrained in our national identity. It stems directly from a hard-learned historic lesson. Freedom, once lost, is incredibly difficult to regain and must be vigilantly protected by the entire nation. This legacy has shaped a defense model in which every citizen is viewed as a potential contributor to national resilience. Reflecting again on our history, one cannot overlook the Lithuanian armed resistance movement that emerged after the Second World War, when Lithuania and other Baltic states were occupied by Russians. Despite lacking external support and operating in a very difficult landscape without mountains or other natural defensive terrain, Lithuanian ordinary citizens turned freedom fighters and waged a resistance war until 1953, almost 10 years. This was the longest lasting organized military resistance against Russian occupation in whole Central and Eastern Europe. At that time, it was controlled by Russians. Though ultimately unable to liberate the country at that time, the struggle remains a powerful symbol of societal resistance in Lithuania. It proved that even without formal state structures, an organized and determined population can impose significant cost on an occupying force and keep the flame of freedom alive. So this legacy directly informs our present-day understanding. As you already mentioned, a well-prepared, resilient population is a critical component of national defense and deterrence. Lithuania's modern defense strategy acknowledges that military strength alone, while essential, may not be sufficient against a powerful adversary. So credible deterrence requires the active engagement, preparedness, and psychological resilience of the entire society. The goal is clear: to make any potential aggression or attempt to occupation so difficult and costly that it is deterred in the first place. deterrence is crucial in this regard. Speaking about our concept in Lithuania, I would like to mention a few elements. First, increasing civil preparedness through public education. And key elements include integrating critical thinking and civil education into national curriculum, running public awareness campaigns to educate the public about the nature of hybrid threats, common disinformation narratives, and how to spot fake news. Also, I would like to mention very widely distributing practical guides, such as the well-known booklet, for example, Prepared to Survive Emergencies and War, which advises citizens on how to act in various crisis scenarios, including wartime. So these combined efforts ensure that civilians are not only informed but empowered to contribute to national resilience. Second important element is improving civil defense infrastructure. This includes enhancing warning systems, identifying and potentially preparing shelters, and ensuring the continuity of essential services during crisis. And last but not least, strongly supporting volunteer organizations. For example, the Lithuanian Riflemen's Union, a historic organization revived after independence, provides paramilitary and civil defense training to thousands of volunteers, by this significantly enhancing the pool of citizens with basic preparedness skills and fostering a culture of civic duty.
Even if Russian aggression towards Ukraine is brought to a close by negotiated settlement, it may reemerge elsewhere on the European continent. Keeping this in mind, how do you anticipate Lithuania's NATO contributions evolving or priorities as a NATO ally shifting if the Russo-Ukrainian war is brought to a close?
So, as I have already mentioned, the threat that Russia poses today is long lasting. We should understand that and be prepared. It will persist as long as Russia remains an authoritarian state driven by imperialistic ambitions. So that's why, again, I would like to reiterate that the end of this war can ensure long lasting security in Europe and the whole transatlantic area only under some conditions. Russia must be defeated in Ukraine and brought to justice for its crime. Do you know why Russia is today so brutal, cruel, and self confident? It is because of its perceived impunity. Russia has never been truly punished for its terrible crimes against other nations. I presented just one example of very tragic example of my country. We lost 25% of our population in 20th century to Russian occupation. Other countries occupied or controlled, dominated by Russians, also uh, mm, suffered terribly. So if it is goes unpunished again this time, it will definitely continue to commit crimes and attack other countries. Ukraine's NATO membership is also of crucial importance. The Ukrainian army would be a great asset to NATO, as it is the only one army in Europe today that has proven capable of effectively fighting against Russia, NATO's most significant and direct threat today. So these three key elements, Russia's defeat, accountability for its crimes, and Ukraine's NATO membership, are crucial to ensure long-lasting peace in the transatlantic area. So until this happens, Lithuania's priorities and contributions will not change. We definitely will continue to support Ukraine by any means necessary. We will continue to advocate for Ukraine's membership in NATO and the EU. We are going to increase our own defense and deterrence capabilities, including maintaining high defense spending, further strengthening cooperation with allies is also crucial. We also are going to further build national resilience and definitely will continue to contribute to Europe's and the transatlantic area's security.
I'm hoping we can now shift to further discuss broader global implications of the war and its potential end. In 2023, in a joint press release with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida of Japan, former NATO Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg was quoted as saying, "Transatlantic and Indo-Pacific security is deeply interconnected. What happens in this region matters to NATO, and what happens in Europe matters to the Indo-Pacific." As Moscow and Beijing grow increasingly united in their ambitions to spur global democratic backslide and violate the territorial sovereignty of their neighboring states, what lessons can be learned from Lithuania's defense posture that might be useful in a future conflict in the Indo-Pacific region?
Again, very, very good question. But first and foremost, I should say that we must prevent any future conflict in the Indo-Pacific which would have catastrophic global consequences. And again, the most critical step in this regard is ensuring Russia's defeat in Ukraine. China, autocratic China, is closely watching how events unfold. As NATO leaders declared at the Washington summit last year, China is a key enabler of Russia's war. So if Russia prevails, it will almost certainly embolden China to act more aggressively, including potential attack against Taiwan. The same applies to other accomplices of Russia, to North Korea, which is not only providing military support to Russia, but also directly participating in the aggression against Ukraine. So Russia's victory would encourage North Korea to act more aggressively in the Korean Peninsula and maybe even beyond. So with regard to lessons from Lithuania's experience in dealing with authoritarian regime, with whether it be Russia or China, I should mention that primary lesson is the importance of being consistent, determined, and principled in defending your values and sovereignty. I remember 3 years ago, former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg aptly put it, I quote, "The protection of our values is more important than profit." The so-called policies of appeasement towards dictators or naive belief that authoritarian regimes can be changed through trade or enhanced economic cooperation has historically led to the strengthening of those regimes, increased aggressiveness, wars, and immense human suffering. Our Lithuanian decades-long experience confirms that a values-based foreign and security policy is ultimately the most effective and sustainable policy in the long term. Speaking specifically about defense posture, I believe that these elements of Lithuania's approach could be also valuable for our partners in the Indo-Pacific. First, as we already discussed, the total defense concept, emphasizing that national defense is not solely the military's responsibility, but requires the preparedness, participation, and psychological resilience of the entire society. This includes civil defense training, countering disinformation, protecting critical infrastructure, and fostering a strong national will to resist aggression. This societal resilience is a powerful deterrent in itself. Second, investing in credible national defense. This means allocating resources adequate. I would like to stress this word adequate to the threats faced and focusing on acquiring modern interoperable capabilities that address specific vulnerabilities. Third, building resilience against hybrid threats. Lithuania has really significant experience in countering non-military forms of aggression, such as cyber attacks, energy coercion, political interference, and disinformation. And fourth, last but not least, fostering close cooperation with allies and like-minded countries. As a member of NATO and the EU, Lithuania actively contributes to collective security, but also we understand the importance of building strong partnerships beyond formal alliances, including with Indo-Pacific partners. Lithuania's example shows, I truly believe, how smaller states, when working together and aligning their efforts, can create a very effective collective security dynamic, enhancing interoperability, burden sharing, and political solidarity against authoritarian coercion.
As we come to the end of our discussion, we'll conclude by looking at Lithuania-Canada defense relations and Canada's cooperation with the wider Baltic region in that regard. Canada currently leads the Enhanced Forward Presence Battalion in Latvia. From Lithuania's perspective, how could Canada best deepen its presence as a NATO ally across the Baltic region?
As I already mentioned, Lithuania and the other Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, view Canada as a very trusted transatlantic partner, and we appreciate very much its contribution to the security of the Baltic states and the entire NATO eastern flank. Canada's military presence in the Baltic is being scaled up to a Canada-led NATO multinational brigade in Latvia, which will see further reinforcement through 2026, a commitment we value highly. We would like to expand and enhance cooperation with Canada in the Baltic region, and I would like to maybe name three important sectors where deeper Canadian presence would be beneficial. First, air and missile defense. Stronger air and missile defense coverage is one of the Baltic states' top defense priorities. So Canada's participation expertise to regional solutions in this regard would be very significant. Second, NATO air policing. Canadian participation in the Baltic air policing mission, which currently safeguards the airspace over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and the NATO command, also would be highly appreciated. And last but not least, regional training and exercises. Increasing Canadian participation in regional training events and cross-Baltic exercises would further enhance interoperability and demonstrate alliance capability across the entire region of three Baltic states.
Continuing along this line of discussion, could you specify what areas would be most beneficial for further Canadian-Lithuanian defense cooperation? If, of course, there are any areas that differ or require further attention than mentioned in pan-Baltic Canadian cooperation, as discussed prior.
I believe there are several high-impact areas where further bilateral Canadian-Lithuanian defense cooperation would be especially beneficial, both bilaterally and within the NATO broader context. Given our shared values, complementary capabilities focusing on these areas could significantly strengthen deterrence and resilience. But I also should mention that Canada already contributes Canadian Armed Forces personnel to the NATO Force Integration Unit in Lithuania and strongly supports the NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence, based in Vilnius, and we look forward to continuing cooperation in these fields. Other fields where we would see great potential for enhanced cooperation include, first of all, cybersecurity and countering hybrid threats. As I already mentioned, Lithuania is a regional leader in cyber defense and countering disinformation, while Canada brings world-class cyber intelligence and threat monitoring capabilities. So joint cyber exercises, knowledge sharing and cooperation on counter disinformation strategies and narratives would be highly valuable. Second, joint training and interoperability, enhancing participation in joint training beyond existing large-scale exercises could focus on specific capability gaps or specialized unit integration to further improve how our forces operate together. I already mentioned, speaking about Canada's contribution to Baltic Sea region security, I already mentioned air and missile defense. It's a priority for all three Baltic states, including Lithuania. I also would like to draw your attention to defense industry cooperation. Now Lithuania scales up its domestic defense production, so cooperation with Canada offers for us a really potential mutual benefits. And one specific area I would like to mention is production of drones and anti-drone systems. And last but not least, I already mentioned Arctic, so importance of Arctic. So Lithuania is not an Arctic state, but as a northern European country and a member of the EU and NATO, we are ready to work closely with Canada, contributing to Arctic security and development.
Ultimately, within the larger framework of NATO, could you see Canada further integrating its defense cooperation with the Nordic-Baltic 8? From the Lithuanian point of view, to close us out for today, can you draw any similarities between the security challenges that Canada faces and those faced by allies within the Nordic and Baltic regions?
Let me start maybe by answering the second part of your question about security challenges. From a Lithuanian perspective, there are indeed several key similarities in the security challenges faced by Canada and the Nordic-Baltic regions. So, first of all, Russia as the primary state adversary. This is a most fundamental shared challenge. Both Canada and the Nordic-Baltic 8 countries recognized Russia's aggressive actions and disregard for international law as the principal threat to stability. Second, Arctic concerns. As I already mentioned, Russia's intention to dominate the Arctic, its military build-up and its assertive posture in the region are significant worries. This concern is amplified by close cooperation in this regard with China, which, despite not being an Arctic country, clearly and even aggressively demonstrates its long-term strategic interest there. I also should mention challenges to freedom of navigation and international norms. And Russia, we see very clearly that Russia's challenges to maritime norms, particularly in the Baltic Sea, North Atlantic, and Arctic, are against our interests. So cooperation, again, between Russia and China in this regard, again, multiplies the perceived threat. Hybrid warfare, Russia's global use of hybrid warfare, including disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and meddling campaigns targeting our democracies, is a real challenge faced by both Canada and the entire Nordic-Baltic region. So given these shared threats and the strong strategic logic behind greater alignment, we definitely see potential for Canada to deepen its defense cooperation with the Nordic-Baltic 8 countries within the NATO framework, and I truly believe that such integration would contribute meaningfully to collective security and deterrence on NATO's northern and eastern flanks.
Aggression from Russia and its allies remain a persistent threat to NATO generally, of course, but the commonalities that Canada, Lithuania, and other Baltic and Nordic NATO member countries face in this regard make the necessity of our increased defense cooperation all the more urgent. As such, I thank you greatly for taking the time to speak with us today about this urgent and persistent threat, and hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you again for this really great opportunity to discuss with you on, as you already mentioned, very important issues. And I believe speaking about the cooperation between our two countries, Lithuania, Canada, Lithuania, Baltic states, is a great example of solidarity, and is great example how we have to address those security challenges we are facing, and the best way to address these challenges is solidarity, way of uniting our efforts.
Thank you very much again for your time today.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss an update. For more in-depth analysis and updates on national security and defense, be sure to visit our website, www.cdinstitute.ca, where you can find articles, reports, and more. Thank you for listening, and a big thank you to our guest, Ambassador Egidijus Meilunas. We hope you'll tune in next time. Take care.